The rain tapped softly on the window, like tiny fingers trying to whisper secrets. In a quiet town surrounded by hills that folded like blankets over the earth, a single lamplight glowed in a small house with ivy crawling up its walls. Inside, the hallway mirror stood cold and still, covered in a dusty blue cloth, as if someone had tried to forget it. In the smallest bedroom at the end of the hall, shadows danced along the walls as a storm rolled in. Lightning flickered, lighting up shelves filled with dolls, books, and shiny ribbons. Yet the bed in the center of the room stayed still. Lainey, a girl of just 8, lay curled under her quilt, wide awake. She never liked storms, but it wasn't thunder that made her hide her face beneath the covers. It was something quieter. Every night, when the lights went off and the house creaked softly, she could feel it watching the mirror across from her bed. It wasn't just a mirror, not to her. When she had looked into it last week, something strange had happened. The girl inside hadn't smiled when she smiled. She had stared back with a frown, her eyes heavy like rain clouds. Lainey had rushed to cover it with an old towel, and ever since then, she hadn't dared peek again. The storm outside rumbled low, but inside, it was silence that grew loudest. The kind of silence that pressed against the walls and made everything seem sharper, stranger. A gust of wind brushed past the window. Then, the softest sound came from the hallway like cloth sliding to the floor. Lainey froze. Her heart skipped like a pebble across a pond. She pulled the blanket tighter, holding her breath. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just the wind. But then came another sound, the faintest creak of the floorboards, as if someone had stepped just outside her room. Her eyes, wide now, darted toward the door. It remained closed. Yet something inside her stirred, a cold flutter in her chest. Carefully, slowly, she slid from the bed and tiptoed across the rug, her small feet making no sound. The mirror on her wall still sat covered, but now her eyes were drawn to the hallway beyond her door. She opened it a crack. A chill brushed her cheeks as she peered out. The blue cloth that had been draped over the tall hallway mirror now lay crumpled on the floor. The mirror stood uncovered, gleaming faintly in the lightning's flicker. She didn't move. She didn't even blink. But the girl in the hallway mirror did. For a moment, everything stopped. Then, Lainey slammed the door shut, her heart thudding like a drum. She backed away, her mind spinning. That wasn't a trick. That wasn't just fear. The girl in the mirror had moved on her own. Not like Lainey, not like a reflection. Trembling, she returned to her bed, pulling the covers over her head, whispering to herself that it would be gone by morning. But it wasn't. The next day dawned clear and bright, with birdsong fluttering through the open window. Yet the hallway mirror remained bare. The blue cloth was gone, and Lainey didn't know where it had gone. She asked her mother, but her mother only smiled and said she hadn't touched a thing. She asked her brother, but he just shrugged and went back to his puzzles. So Lainey avoided the hallway. She avoided mirrors. She changed in the dark and brushed her hair without looking. And every time she passed by that tall mirror, she looked at the floor. Until the day she didn't. It happened by accident. She was late for school and dashed into the hall, forgetting to look down. Her eyes lifted, and there she was. The girl in the mirror, still watching. But this time, the reflection didn't look angry. It looked sad. Her eyes were softer. Her mouth trembled like she was about to cry. And something inside Lainey hesitated. She stepped closer. The other girl mirrored her step. But as Lainey reached out a hand, the mirror shimmered not like glass, but like a pool disturbed by a pebble. A swirl of silver rippled across its surface, and before Lainey could breathe, she was no longer in the hallway. The air smelled like peppermint and old books. The sky above was pink and gold, with clouds shaped like animals. She stood in a forest where trees grew upside down, their roots twisting above and their leaves brushing the ground. Light floated like butterflies, and everything shimmered with magic. Lainey looked around, heart racing. Where was she? She heard laughter quiet, echoing laughter, not far off. She followed it through the strange woods, stepping over glowing mushrooms and golden pebbles. The path twisted like a ribbon, and at its end stood a little house, no bigger than a garden shed. Smoke puffed from its chimney in perfect circles, and its door creaked open all on its own. Inside sat the mirror girl. She looked just like Lainey, same brown hair, same freckled nose, same striped socks, but her eyes looked as if they'd been crying for a very long time. Lainey stepped forward, slowly. The girl looked up and stood. Around the small room were dozens of mirrors, but each one showed something different. One mirror showed Lainey at school, hiding behind her desk, while others laughed. Another showed her watching two girls whispering without her. Another showed her standing at the bathroom sink, frowning at her reflection. This place... It knew her, every part. The mirror girl reached for one frame and touched it gently. The image shimmered and changed. Now it showed a younger Lainey, smiling wide as she ran through a field, her arms open, laughing in the sun. Lainey blinked, unsure what to feel. The girl turned to her and placed a hand on her chest, not on Lainey's, but her own. Then she pointed to Lainey. Her eyes said it clearly, "This is you. This is still you." But Lainey didn't believe it. She shook her head. She pointed to the other mirrors, the ones that showed the moments she didn't want to remember, the ones that made her stomach twist and her heart feel heavy. The mirror girl stepped back. She picked up a shard of a broken mirror and placed it into Lainey's hand. It felt warm. Suddenly, a low growl echoed through the forest. The lights outside flickered and faded. The walls of the little house began to tremble. The mirror girl's eyes widened. She pointed to the door. Lainey didn't need to be told twice. She ran. Outside, the sky had darkened. Thick black fog crept along the ground, and from it rose shadows tall, twisting shapes with eyes like mirrors. They hissed and whispered, their voices like broken glass. They reached for her, cold and sharp. She ran through the forest, the shard still clutched in her hand. But the shadows followed, faster now, swirling and snapping. One caught her foot, and she fell hard onto the glowing moss. She turned, they were nearly upon her. In desperation, she held up the mirror shard. The light inside it burst out like a star. The shadows screamed and recoiled, melting back into the fog. The light spread, washing over the forest, touching every leaf, every tree, every hidden shape. And then silence. Lainey stood slowly. The forest was peaceful again. The mirror girl was beside her once more, smiling faintly. She pointed to a tree, and on its bark shimmered a doorway, a mirror. Lainey stepped toward it, then paused. She looked at the girl, who nodded, and Lainey finally understood. This girl wasn't someone else. She was her. Not just the her she saw in photographs or in school mirrors. She was every feeling Lainey had ever hidden. Every tear she'd held in, every smile she was afraid to give. She reached out and took the girl's hand, and together, they stepped through the mirror. The hallway was quiet. Lainey blinked as her feet touched the wooden floor once more. The mirror behind her shimmered softly, no longer a door, but just glass. Yet she was not alone. The mirror girl stood beside her, whole and calm, her eyes still and clear. But something felt different. The air had weight to it, like a storm waiting to break. As Lainey turned, the hallway around her began to twist. The lights dimmed, the walls stretched tall and narrow, and the shadows lengthened into shapes with sharp edges. She wasn't home. Not really. The house groaned, and the walls rippled like water. The familiar paintings on the wall changed. Now they showed Lainey's face, twisted with worry, her eyes wide with doubt. Whispers filled the air. Too quiet, too slow, not pretty, not good enough. Lainey covered her ears, but the voices came from inside, not outside. She ran. The hallway stretched as she moved, longer and longer. Each mirror she passed showed not her, but dozens of her reflections, all slightly different. Some frowning, some crying, some yelling. All of them broken in different ways. Her legs ached, but she kept running, the mirror girl beside her, never falling behind. The hallway narrowed until they reached a door. A single door at the very end, heavy, closed. A strange symbol carved into its wood, half a heart, half a teardrop. Lainey reached for the handle, but the door melted away. Behind it stood the largest mirror yet, floor to ceiling. So clear it looked like a window, but what it showed wasn't her house. It was something else. A twisted version of her room, but dark and gray. Her bed sat broken, her toys tossed aside, and in the center, a shadow stood with no face. Lainey's breath caught. The shadow turned. It looked like her, but taller, made of smoke, with eyes like mirrors. Its arms hung limp. Its shape flickered like flame. It took a step forward. The glass didn't stop it. It stepped through. And so did the fear. The room around her vanished in smoke. Lainey now stood in the broken version of her bedroom. Cold air wrapped around her like fingers. The shadow moved closer, its form curling with doubt and dread. The mirror girl stepped in front of Lainey, arms outstretched, trying to block the shadow. But the shadow simply grew taller, stretching up to the ceiling, speaking with the voice of every cruel thought Lainey had ever whispered to herself. She wasn't good enough. She wasn't smart enough. She didn't belong. The words struck like wind. Lainey staggered back. The mirror girl's hands began to flicker, her edges glowing too bright. Lainey felt something rising in her chest. Not fear, not anymore. Something else. Anger. Not at the mirror, not at the girl, at the shadow. This thing wasn't her. It had stolen her smile, her light, her sleep. It had filled her with doubt. And now, it was trying to take her voice. No more. Lainey stepped forward, past the mirror girl, her little fists clenched. Her heart pounded, but her feet were steady. She walked straight toward the shadow. The smoke hissed. It tried to grow bigger. But Lainey raised the mirror shard, still warm in her hand. Its light began to grow, not bright and blinding, but soft and golden, like the first sun after a storm. She held it up, not as a weapon, but like a candle in the dark. The shadow paused. The shard reflected Lainey's face. Not perfect, not posed, real, freckled, wide-eyed, messy-haired, and behind her own reflection stood the mirror girl, glowing the same way. The shard trembled. Then, as if guided by something deep and ancient, Lainey pressed the shard to her heart, and she spoke. She said that she was tired of hiding, tired of believing she wasn't enough. She said she didn't want to be afraid of her own face anymore. She said it softly, but the words filled the room like thunder. The shadow froze. Cracks split across its smoky chest. The whispers faded. A wind blew through the room, warm and full of light. The shadow tried to hold its shape, but the cracks spread. Light burst from within it, as if something trapped inside had finally been set free. With a final shudder, the shadow shattered into dust, vanishing into the floor. Silence. The mirror girl stepped forward, now whole and beaming. Her smile was small but true. She reached out and touched Lainey's hand, then placed it over Lainey's heart. And slowly, gently, the girl stepped back into the mirror. As she vanished, her reflection returned to the glass, no longer moving on its own. Just Lainey. But something was different now. The girl in the mirror smiled when Lainey smiled. And for the first time in a long, long while, Lainey didn't look away. The house was quiet once more. Not the kind of quiet that feels heavy or haunted, but peaceful, like the quiet after a long story has been told, and the last page gently turned. Lainey stood before the hallway mirror, still holding the mirror shard. Its light had dimmed, but its warmth remained. She could feel it pulsing gently, like a heartbeat in her palm. Outside, the sun had begun to rise, washing the world in soft golden hues. The hallway, once cold and narrow, now felt wide and warm. The shadows that used to stretch across the floor no longer seemed to whisper. They simply rested. She looked once more into the mirror. There she was, Lainey, plain and true. Her cheeks still pink from the cold, her hair still slightly messy from sleep. But her eyes were clear now. Curious, bright, brave. For the first time, she didn't see the things she disliked. She didn't search for flaws. She saw herself her own face. not as something to hide from, but as something to know, to accept, to maybe, someday, love. She traced a finger down the edge of the mirror, then turned and walked softly back to her room. Her bed was just as she left it. Her favorite plush bear had fallen to the floor, and she picked it up gently, brushing its fur before setting it back on the pillow. Outside, birds called to one another from the rooftops. A gentle breeze stirred the curtains. Everything felt different now, not because the world had changed, but because she had. Later that morning, Lainey joined her family for breakfast. Her mother was stirring oatmeal, humming quietly, while her brother slurped loudly from his spoon. Nothing had changed in their routine. Yet, Lainey noticed how her mother's eyes softened when she looked at her, how her brother offered her the first slice of toast without being asked. These things had always happened, but now Lainey noticed them, and that noticing made all the difference. That afternoon, she stood in front of the bathroom mirror, the one she had avoided for weeks. The one that made her feel smaller than she was. She stepped up to it, heart calm. Her reflection looked back, still the same girl, but something shimmered in her gaze. She tilted her head, observing her features like they were pieces of a puzzle she was finally learning to understand. She didn't love everything she saw, not yet. But she didn't hate it either. That was new. Over the next days, things began to shift. Small things, but real ones. At school, when Lainey saw two girls whispering in the corner, she didn't look away in shame. She didn't wonder if they were laughing at her. She watched, then returned to her drawing. Later, one of the girls asked if she wanted to join in a game. Lainey said yes, even though her voice trembled a little. In class, when her hand shook as she wrote on the board, she didn't feel like running. She just breathed and wrote slower. She remembered the shard, its warmth, its light, that it had come from her. She began to smile more. Not the kind of smile to please others, but the kind that came from a secret joy inside a tiny light that refused to go out. And she began to see others more clearly too. She noticed when her classmate, Jenna, stared at the floor during group work, chewing her sleeve nervously. Lainey gently scooted her chair closer and asked if Jenna wanted to draw together. Jenna nodded, and her eyes lit up, surprised. Lainey realized that everyone had their own shadow, their own reflection they struggled to face. At home, the mirror in the hallway stayed uncovered. Her mother commented once that it looked brighter lately, though she couldn't say why. Lainey only smiled. Each night before bed, she would glance at her reflection. Some nights, she felt proud. Other nights, she still frowned at the way her nose wrinkled when she smiled or the way her ears stuck out a little. But now, she understood something important. Those thoughts didn't have to be scary. They were just thoughts. They didn't decide her worth. One weekend, while cleaning out her closet, she found the dusty blue cloth that once covered the hallway mirror. She held it for a moment, then folded it gently and placed it in a box marked Old Things. She no longer needed it. She no longer needed to hide. Seasons changed. Winter softened into spring. Flowers began to bloom in the garden, and Lainey helped her mother plant tulips and daffodils. As she dug into the soil with her small hands, she thought about the mirror girl. She wondered if she was still out there, in that strange, upside-down forest where clouds took the shape of animals. Maybe she had returned to her quiet house full of mirrors, waiting to help another child find their way. Sometimes, Lainey would look into her reflection and think she saw a flicker, a glimpse of that other girl, just for a second. A shared smile, a twinkle in the eyes, a soft reminder that she was never truly alone. And the mirror shard Lainey kept it in a little pouch by her bed. She didn't need to hold it every day, but she liked knowing it was there, a small piece of light, a piece of herself, reminding her that even when things feel dark or scary, there is always something shining inside. The mirror no longer frightened her, because the reflection it showed now was more than just her face. It was her courage, her kindness, her strength. And so, the girl who once hated her reflection grew to understand it, not because it became perfect, but because she realized it was hers, and that made it beautiful. The moral of Lainey's story is simple, but powerful. Sometimes, the things we fear most about ourselves are only shadows waiting to be seen in the light. And when we dare to face them, truly face them, we don't just see who we are, we begin to see who we can become.